Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Tiana Carter. I am the co-chair of the facilitative working group of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today to this panel about the Pacific Regional Gathering of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform. Before we get started, I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Justin Mohammed to provide some brief opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope I didn't keep people waiting too long. Walking around here seems to be a bit further than what you think in your head, but I'm here now. I'm not going to speak for too long, so I know we're a very distinguished panel here, and they've got lots to share with us and for us to learn from, so I want to make sure we leave enough space for that. But once again, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I do want to kind of just start this session off with talking about, I suppose, the work and the journey that we're about, or we have started and we've commenced, and it was more than ever before. I've kind of seen this around the Pacific regions coming together, talking about this very important issue that we're all meeting here about, is climate, and how we can work together with our Indigenous knowledges at the forefront of our conversations, but also looking at the broader context which climate sits under, and obviously how the global conversations that are taking place. And that was very much represented more recently in Port Douglas in North Queensland, far North Queensland, when we had the regional gathering of the local communities and Indigenous peoples platforms. There's 96 people there representing a whole number of different of the Pacific nations that we had. It was something which, for hearing the passion, but also what comes with that passion is the connectedness of the impacts of climate, and I'll hear that for the first time uninterrupted by government timeframes, but trying to build more into how our Pacific timeframes work and how our Indigenous communities and our local communities work to allow the time for those stories and conversations to take place, is something that I believe, as the Ambassador of First Nations People for Australia, but for all First Nations people, that the ways of doing business, the way we communicate, the way we interact with each other, does not fit a lot of the times the way the Western society has structured forums like this, many meetings that we have with government. And I think there's a balance of turning that around to opening up to get the full connection that we have with our families, communities and individuals, and most importantly, the knowledges and the values that we can bring to the table for that to help with this very important challenge that we have in front of us. We see that today is Health Day, and that's great to have this conversation taking place, because we know, again, when we're talking about Indigenous communities, every community that I've spoken to in Australia, every Indigenous people that I've spoken to globally, we can't separate climate and have that just by itself, or trade or health or gender, that they're all interconnected. And this is very important today that it is Health Day. We know that a healthy country that equates to healthy people, and vice versa, and they aren't one or the other. They have to be going collectively together. And that's not only just a healthy, when I say healthy people, that's just not the physical health, but very importantly the spiritual health, the well-being of our people, and that's to be able to keep not only our country healthy and strong for the next generations, but our spiritual connection to country and our traditions strong for the next generations. So with that part of this year that I've been in this role, I'm really looking forward to hearing the panel here that we have, to continue this very robust but constructive conversation. And by all means, I think that the key to this, and to forums like this and many other international forums, it is time, and the timing is now, that we don't leave our cultural connections and what makes us strong as individuals outside the doors or the security gates, and come in and have to confine with the structures of how meetings and and forums like this are conducted, but we should be encouraged, and part of this panel, and I know what DQ's doing in Australia and this venue here that we've set up, and right next door to our neighbours, our co-neighbours next door with the Moana facility there, is that it's bringing our culture into this place, and as individuals, but also as our nations. So I really encourage that we continue that right through this session today and right through this whole week that we've got ahead of us, and want to just ensure that we continue this as the Pacific, and I mentioned, I think it was last night, our region has a very, very important role to play in the solutions to climate. Our region, I would say, is one of the most rich, diverse, and the depths of Indigenous knowledges is probably one of the leading regions in this world. When you think about each one of our nations can easily and confidently that the Indigenous knowledges and ways of doing business, each one of our nations will be able to speak about that at depth for many, many hours, if not days and weeks. To bringing that to this forum and the challenge that we have globally, our region has a real opportunity to be able to bring our Indigenous knowledges and to the table to help, I would think, to be an example to the world. And if we get it right in the Pacific, I think it's going to be a really great opportunity to lead our charge to address the climate issues that we have in front of us. So with that said, thank you for attending. The experts are here. I'm not the expert in this field. These are the experts. I'm looking forward to listening to them and hearing from them. And thanks once again on behalf of the Australian Government.
Thank you, Ambassador Mohammed, for those thoughtful and supportive words of introduction. And firstly, let me take a moment to thank you for joining us at the Pacific Regional Gathering, and it was an absolute pleasure to host you there. And we look forward to your continued support as well for this important topic. In particular, firstly, before I get into the slides that I have today, I'd first like to send the apologies of Kathy Eatock. She's the co-chair of the Indigenous Peoples Organisation of Australia, and she is the Indigenous Pacific representative on the facilitative working group of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform. Unfortunately, she's not feeling very well today, and so she's asked me to step in and help support the moderation of this event. So before we get into it, as I said earlier, my name's Tiana Carter. I'm the co-chair of the facilitative working group and the party representative for the Western Europe and Others group on that working group. I'm also a policy officer at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of New Zealand, and was very pleased to represent New Zealand at the regional gathering, and also very proudly a Māori woman from the tribes of Ngāpuhi and Ngāti Whātua of New Zealand as well. So welcome. So I think we all know why we're here. This is a panel session on the inaugural LCIPP, Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform, the LCIPP, Pacific Regional Gathering that was held from the 16th to the 20th of October 2023 in Port Douglas, Australia. As Ambassador Mohammed said, we have a number of distinguished panellists joining us today to provide their thoughts on the gathering, and I'll provide a brief introduction with some slides, and then we can take some questions following the reflections from our panellists, and then we're very, very pleased to be launching, for the Australian government to be launching a powerful documentary showcasing everything that happened at the regional gathering. So with that, let's get into it. So the LCIPP Pacific Annual Gathering, Regional Gathering, was a key component of the Facilitative Working Group, the FWG's, work plan, second 3-year work plan, and a mandated activity under Activity 2 of our work plan. And Kathy Eatock led the organisation, the development of that activity, drafting the agenda, selecting the representatives to take part in that in her capacity as a member of the Facilitative Working Group. So, the regional gatherings provide a great example of how First Nations and Indigenous peoples and state party representatives, members can collaborate in these spaces, reflecting the unique mandate of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform within the UNFCCC process. While the event was Indigenous driven, Kathy really welcomed Australia stepping up to support Pacific Indigenous peoples in hosting the week-long event, the week-long climate conference. It reflected in a very practical way how Australia was moving beyond rhetoric to solidly back Pacific Indigenous initiatives to address climate change. It wouldn't have been possible to host the regional gathering without the substantial support of the Australian government, who contributed both financially and in human resources, with DQ staff supporting on the ground during the gathering. Additionally, it received high-level engagement with the Honourable Chris Bowen, Minister for Climate Change, attending the event virtually and hearing from participants of the gathering and their recommendations. Additionally, Joe Evans, Deputy Secretary from the Department of Climate Change, Environment and Energy, Australia, Sally Box, the head of the Australian UNFCCC delegation, and the Australian, and also Elise Murphy, the Director of the Climate Inclusion and Intersectionality Policy Team and International Climate Negotiations and Engagement Branch with DQ, as well as the support of Kristen Tilley, Ambassador for Climate Change, attending. That solid support was critical to enabling the 96 participants to attend the gathering, which included Pacific knowledge holders, party delegates, representatives from constituted bodies, NGOs, UN agencies and other stakeholders, including 54 First Nations peoples. But importantly, this inaugural week-long conference event highlighted a need at the regional level to better facilitate Indigenous input into the LCIPP, COP and UNFCCC processes. It provided a critical opportunity to hear directly from First Nations peoples, not only on their experiences, which we know Indigenous peoples are more disproportionately and detrimentally impacted by the ravages of global warming, but significantly as contributors to the solutions. And we know this is very true of the Pacific. We know First Nations peoples have the answers, the values based on sustainability and the kinship and relationship with nature, and how to best respond to the challenges of global warming. In particular, as a sort of side note, I was very pleased to sit in the high-level statements, national statements yesterday, and hear from the Honourable Mark Brown, the PM of the Cook Islands, who, the quote that really stuck with me is, "Climate change is not a looming threat, but a daily reality of the Pacific." So I think that was really highlighted in the Pacific Regional Gathering and the impacts and experiences that were shared there. In terms of the meeting itself, on day one, we had 2 cultural immersions taking place with participants meeting representatives of the Kuku Yalanji peoples, who are the traditional owners of the oldest continuously surviving rainforest in the world, the Daintree rainforest, extending over 135 million years at Mossman Gorge. Recognised as a World Heritage Site where 1 hectare holds over 30,000 species of plants and animals. The Kuku Yalanji people have a history dating back at least 50,000 years, living in harmony with the culture. The culture is based on a deep respect for the natural environment and an intimate understanding of the seasons passed down from countless generations. Community representatives generously explained aspects of their culture, traditions and legends, showing how plants were traditionally used for medicines and soaps, and touched on sacred cultural practices, such as how those who had passed on to the other side were reunited with their ancestors and taken back to the land. This was followed by a visit to the coastal region of Kuya Beach, where participants attempted the fishing practices of the Kukuyalangi on the mudflats and tidal waters. They also explained traditional hunting practices which are vulnerable and food sources which are vulnerable to global warming. Many of the participants spoke warmly of these cultural components in setting the following discussions against the local community's experiences, and I really look forward to hearing how those experiences may be reflected in others' reflections today. The first half of the conference focused on Indigenous peoples and was dedicated to sharing the impact of climate change on ecosystems and livelihoods, where a number of solutions from the Pacific on mitigating and adapting to climate change were outlined, including a focus on Indigenous-led initiatives. The sessions also called for support for strategies to build the capacity of Indigenous peoples of the Pacific to understand and contribute to UNFCCC processes. And I'm really glad to see some of those faces from the gathering here today. Indigenous self-determination and a rights framework was set throughout the week's deliberations. Through the terminology of Indigenous, though the terminology of Indigenous and indigeneity may be awkward for some island nations of the Pacific region, the gathering highlighted the relevance and benefit of drawing on these international standards for both Pacifica and Islander peoples and island nations that have ancestral connection to their lands and waters. It was unanimously agreed that this legal definition would be useful for Pacific peoples to draw on, given the definition legally applied worldwide. We considered priority areas to be addressed at COP28 to include loss and damage, adaptation, finance and mitigation, and nationally determined contributions. And we considered Indigenous-led climate solutions. The Pacific Regional Gathering also contributed to all three functions of the LCIPP, which are knowledge sharing, capacity building, and input into climate policies and actions. Talanoa, or talking circles, were also featured throughout the week, which is a key feature of Pacific people's engagements and the way that they share stories and experiences. Under Just Transition, we heard about the just transitions to renewable energy involving communities in the district of Nakula, Fiji, and learnt about Pacific Island countries' regional dialogue with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is the forefront body of scientific knowledge on climate change, and how to enhance Pacific engagement and contributions into the IPCC processes. As I said earlier, the gathering also considered the implementation of Indigenous rights framework. Discussions were commenced with Ian Fry. The gathering started, this session started with remarks by Ian Fry, the Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and Human Rights. We had a presentation on the UN resolution requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, led by Vanuatu and co-sponsored by 105 states. We also heard about the Torres Strait 8 action at the UN Human Rights Committee and a legal challenge by traditional owners to prevent seismic blasting of the ocean by extractive industries. The last 2 days of the gathering focused on an exchange of solutions with parties and other stakeholders through Roundtable Talanoa. We focused on the importance of regional collaborations and Pacific priorities at COP28 and beyond, and priorities for small island developing states and the 2050 Blue Pacific Continent Strategy. We also considered regional challenges and opportunities, outcomes of the Oceans Conference, the draft Oceans Declaration, and free, prior and informed consent in the management of the Great Barrier Reef. Additionally, we explored national challenges and opportunities, as well as the challenges and opportunities for women and girls towards implementation of the Paris Agreement. The final day was accumulated in the presentation on an Indigenous decision-making workshop as a follow-up initiative of the regional gathering. The Indigenous decision-making workshop will show the development of 15 projects, 10 across the Pacific region and 5 across Australia, where communities will choose mitigation, adaptation or community building, capacity building projects to be developed into business cases to subsequently secure funding for their implementation. We also heard presentations on a proposal for the establishment of a Pacific Regional LCIPP and FWG body to better respond to the particular needs of Pacific First Nations peoples and to build stronger Pacific-wide collaborations between states and Indigenous peoples. This proposal is similar to that currently going ahead in Latin America in the region, which is seeking to establish an Amazonian sub-regional LCIPP hub. As mentioned, the Australian Minister for Climate Change, the Honourable Chris Bowen, also addressed the gathering and heard from participants on key impacts and solutions to adapt and mitigate climate change. Representatives of the gathering then put forward a series of recommendations to the Minister and for the facilitative working group and parties to consider in their work plans, priorities and future deliberations. These recognise the profound understanding of Indigenous peoples that Indigenous peoples have of their environment that's rooted in the Pacific's unique culture and knowledge, which offers invaluable insights for shaping climate action globally. The concerns of the Pacific, such as ocean health, climate-induced migration, and ending reliance on fossil fuels, should be central to global climate goals. Strengthening the engagement and decision-making between Indigenous peoples and the Pacific and global climate processes to ensure that global climate actions are more effective was one of the recommendations. Additionally, enhancing engagement at the regional level through the development of a dedicated regional hub to promote the knowledge and values of Indigenous peoples. While the recommendations are region-specific, some very important points have been highlighted on elevating the values and the need for stronger coordination and collaboration, which could be reflected in the next work plan of the LCIPP and its activities. Additionally, FWG members could discuss how Indigenous values and voices from the region could be elevated through existing UNFCCC processes. The broader community has much to learn regarding just transitions and implementing that within a rights-based framework that respects the rights of Indigenous peoples, and the feedback from the regional gathering will form an important part of the FWG's report to the scientific body, the subsidiary body on scientific and technological advice, sorry that's a mouthful, the SBSTA, for its consideration next June. Significantly, it will also set the scene for the inclusion of Indigenous peoples of the Pacific and as a whole to be front and centre of the negotiations and outcomes at COP31 and hopefully, which we hope will be hosted in Australia and hopefully in the lead up to it, with COP30 being potentially held in Brazil with its very own, in the Amazonian region of Belém. We need First Nations and Indigenous peoples not only at the decision-making tables, but as drivers of change with state parties and as solid allies in fostering the shift required to transform to transform and nurture our planet. So with that introduction, which wasn't very brief, but hopefully you all took away from it, I now would like to move into the next segment of our panel, which is the panel discussions and hearing from our distinguished guests. Thank you for that. Before we move into the panel, what I'd like to do is I will invite each panelist up. They will provide a brief introduction of who they are and what role they took in terms of the regional gathering, and then provide some brief reflections before we open up the floor. We'll go through each panelist, open up the floor for questions, and hopefully we'll lead into the documentary. I believe that one of our panellists unfortunately has to leave us a little bit early, so now I'd like to invite Kathy to the podium to start for us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tiana. That was a great introduction into how the meeting went, and honestly, it really covered pretty much the whole thing. So my remarks will be pretty short. As Tiana indicated, I have to run to another event, actually right next door, which is convenient. The space is huge. My name is Kathy Tiadungan, and I work as climate envoy with the Ministry of Environment with the Marshall Islands government. I also run a youth nonprofit on climate change called Tiotigum back in the Marshalls as well. Besides that, I'm also the Small Island Developing States SIDS representative on the FWG, the Facilitative Working Group for the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform. So I was very happy to join the Pacific Gathering, and this was definitely something that I personally prioritized as I think something that we're really needing to beef up is Pacific engagement within the FWG. The relationship with the Pacific is slightly different, with Indigenous folks in the Pacific, and that's something we've been talking about in the sense that much of the Pacific, Indigenous people of the Pacific have party representation within this process. Much of our governments in the Pacific are run by Indigenous Pacific Islanders. So, for example, in the Marshall Islands, the government is mostly Marshallese people who are working there. And so, when we come to the FWG, it's a different relationship to the process for many of us, and the engagement that we tend to have within the COP is through PCIDS. And through SPREP, which are regional organizations that help coordinate Pacific representatives at the COP. And this is what we're mostly comfortable with and what we're, the ways in which most of us engage in it. And so with the FWG, it's a little bit of trying to get more party representatives to be aware of what the local community, what the LCIPP is, and what the benefits are for engaging in that process. And then also making sure that there's room for the Indigenous people of the Pacific who don't have that party representation, or those maybe who are coming from the grassroots who don't feel that the government party representatives properly represent them as well. So I think there's still a lot of room for growth in that sense, and that's why I really stood behind the idea of creating a regional organization for the Pacific, because there really isn't that many spaces where you get Pacific folks from, let's say, the Marshall Islands, Fiji, Samoa, these other countries, to engage with Indigenous folks and First Nations people from Australia or from New Zealand, or from the territories, the islands that are territories of the United States or the French territories, and I really think that it's a good practice for us to be figuring out ways in which we can uplift each other and get the messaging that Indigenous people want into the negotiations rooms, which is what my purpose is as a party representative, is in this process, is ensuring that we get that kind of messaging into the text. That being said, we know that Indigenous values, Indigenous storytelling, and Indigenous priorities are beyond the UNFCCC process, that it isn't just about the UNFCCC process, it's also about exchanging best practices, about following our protocol and uplifting our knowledge holders and providing that space for them to be able to engage properly in this process. So I think it was just really eye-opening for me and such a such a great opportunity to be able to connect with other folks, and there's still quite a bit of capacity building and raising awareness for how to properly engage in this process and being really transparent about what folks will get out of this process. If it's even something that is beneficial for our communities at the end of the day, what are the tangible outputs on the ground? That's what we really need for our communities. You know, we need to be able to go back and say, this is why you should engage in this process and this is why it's useful for us. So there were some really interesting case studies that were exchanged too about different communities who are taking control of climate action in their amongst their communities, and being able to exchange those was so beneficial. So I guess I just want to say that I really look forward to continuing to push for more islanders to be engaged in the LCIPP, and so that we can be exchanging these issues and these values, because there's so much similarities between the ways in which we relate to our land and to the environment, and how we need to bring those values more into this entire process. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing some of those really great reflections, and hopefully that's provided some thoughts to other panellists on what they might want to hear. I think since we're all sitting pretty comfortably now, I won't ask anyone to take the podium, but maybe we'll start with some reflections from, I see Sina has the mic, so maybe I'll give it to Sina.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting to go first because, as you all know, in the Pacific, it's elders first. But as this is an Indigenous gathering where we also acknowledge the intergenerational exchange of knowledge, so I will take that as a cue for me to step forward and share some of the learnings. And looking at my elders, sitting here, seeking permission, of course, your blessings to start this conversation. First of all, my name is Siosina Melelui. I'm Samoan, educated in Fiji and Australia, have traveled across the Pacific through my work at SPREP, so I call myself a daughter of the Pacific. I've been very privileged to meet and also learn from a lot of the elders from the region. And my role at SPREP, I am the climate traditional knowledge expert there. One of the very first roles looking at traditional knowledge through the climate lens. SPREP, as mentioned by Kathy, we provide coordination when it comes to Pacific Island countries attending COP. My role in attending the LCIPP gathering is really to listen and also to seek guidance. What do our Pacific Indigenous communities want? And that was my task, basically. And then the second part, because of my hat under the Climate and Ocean Support Program in the Pacific, one of the key, one of the main reasons for us engaging in this space is because our understanding of the research, the richness in our knowledge that is equivalent to the science that is being used in a lot of our reports. That is the other side of the gathering that I was very interested in, is to find out what else is happening in the Indigenous space, especially with the research. There's not a lot of research around Indigenous knowledge in the climate space. There's not a lot of these knowledge represented in the reports and the key findings in the IPCC reports. There are mentions of it, but we rarely see a lot of that. So those were some of my instructions, is to really look at how do we continue to engage our elders? How do we make sure that the knowledge that is being practiced is included in a lot of these peer-reviewed research processes? And it was really important for me to attend the meeting because it was one of the very first meetings where all the Pacific Islanders or every community was represented, from the French territories to our auntie from Rapa Nui. We rarely get that opportunity, so it was great to get that guidance as to where to next. Kathy mentioned that in the LCIPP FWG group, there's not a lot of representation from our Pacific communities, and the question is, how do we get to that representation, and also how do we unpack really the getting our communities to engage really comes down to unpacking what are the benefits for us, and looking at not just the UNFCCC, but also at the other COPs. We have to look at it in a holistic approach, because a lot of our Indigenous knowledge and a lot of the work that we do, we don't separate. And we need to bring that lens into these discussions, knowing that whatever issues that we bring to the climate change discussions, it's also reflected in other areas. Those were some of the learnings that I also managed to take home, some of the lessons, as well as a need to have more gatherings. The 1 week was not enough for us, and that clearly came out of the meeting. Thank you for that, Tiana.
Thank you so much, Sina, and you're absolutely right. We should have started with our elders first. But thank you for starting us off, and thank you for sharing some of those reflections in regards to, how do we increase that representation in the LCIPP space and the FWG and UNFCCC space. Firstly, be there in the conversations, but then also how do you then take that back home, and what are the benefits for those communities? So thank you so much for sharing that. I think in that vein, perhaps we'll give to Brother Sele for his reflections.
Bula Vinaka from Fiji. My name is Sele Tangivuni, representing one of the biggest landowners in Fiji. Some of you probably have tasted Fiji water. That's where I come from. It's my mother's tribe. And the passion and the crusade continues. I stand here with all due respect, Your Excellency, and Matriarch from Rapa Nui. And I'm so blessed to be part of an August panel here. And I'll probably spend the next 3 minutes just to align myself to some of the discussion that I've already sharing, to share my perspective as an Itauke Indigenous people of the great opening that we have seen in Port Douglas. And with that same breath, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Government of Australia for giving us that timely and yet long overdue opportunity for the Tauke, or for the Indigenous people of the Pacific, of what we call as Oceania, this space for us to come together in Port Douglas for our Talanoa. We create that warm ring of friendship where we start, and sitting there, be part of the exuberance and excitement of the kids that I brought from Fiji. I felt deep down that, yes, it's about time for me to give this baton to the young ones, because I've been in this space for 3 decades. And I've seen rainbows that comes with that different kaleidoscopic potential that it comes, and the discussion that all our panelists for the past few COPs, it sends chills that it may not see the day of light, but we continue and forge on. And that's what we did in Port Douglas. The excitement that we have done, and I'm noticed LCIPP Secretariat, UNFCCC is in the room. I would like to take this time to thank them for continue that opportunity for us to continue this. I won't talk science. I won't talk, since I notice my good friend Doc is sitting on the other end. I'll just spend three operational principles as an elder of the Pacific, why we should continue this. If I answer the question that Sina have already mentioned, where to, from Port Douglas, I would really plead with the donors, Government of Australia and LCIPP Secretariat, we need that separate Latin concept, separate Pacific, LCIPP and FWG, so that we can continue. Because when you see the 7 socio-cultural categories we have, and when you peep inside the Pacific LCIPP, you see another big wide ocean there. And we are somehow in our natural landscape with our own different landscape that I'll start from Melanesia, Polynesia to Micronesia. It goes, if we look at it from the ecological landscape approach of a ridge to reef perspective, we have different stories that needs to be heard and that needs to be told. My first operational principle is the sanctity. What are some of the justifications for us to continue this? One, the Pacific people's voice need to continue to vibrate more. And I truly believe the Pacific voice will continue and help this in UNFCCC global landscape, is to voice out. And I believe that we can voice out and continue to promote, advocate, and promote the sanctity of Indigenous identity. That's who we are. The special vulnerability story from the Pacific. That's the most powerful story that we could. And I align myself to some of the high level who have spent the last few days. And I align myself to King Charles when he said there is glorious misappropriation for the small island development states. We are not the cause of all this, and we need special attention. My second one is along the line of the authenticity and legitimacy of who we are really. We really need to vibrate that connotation. Not only individual, but communal rights. And these are, when we talk about just transitions, climate justice, or social inclusion, this is the operational principle that the Pacific could voice out and assist others so that we can continue. And the last one, why we should continue this LCIPP Pacific, it's the operational principle of inclusion for ecological harmony. Don't get me wrong. Don't find me as to voice out inclusion that it's only us to be included. It's the other way around too. It's for us as Indigenous people, including others so that we don't leave anyone behind. So those are my principles of why we need to continue this Talanoa space in the Pacific. And it is those few words from an elder's perspective, Diana, and Your Excellency, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sile, for sharing those 3 principles and for your very, very kind reflections on the gathering. I believe that Iriti would like to go last, so perhaps we might start with you, Ambassador, or if you had any further reflections on the gathering. That's all right. We shall go to my brother George.
I'd like to acknowledge and recognize all Indigenous peoples, especially Indigenous people of this land, the Indigenous people in this room, from across Australia, but also across the Pacific, and across the world who are here, joining us not only on this panel, listening here today, but also joining us live stream. I'd also like to acknowledge, as the speakers, the Government of Australia for supporting to provide the space for the Pacific Gathering in Australia, but also this panel. I'd also like to acknowledge UNFCCC, the staff who also took part in organizing the meeting while we had in Australia, because I find that this, as you saw in the brief, was the first time of such a gathering of not only Indigenous peoples, but also people who work behind the scene on policy on Indigenous people, but also people like myself, an academic. So my name is Salah George Carter. I am a academic with the Australian National University. I'm the director of the Pacific Institute, but also the deputy head of department for Department of Pacific Affairs. And so we conduct research and teach Pacific Studies at the Australian National University, and also provide teaching for the Diplomatic Academy as well as the War Academy. So it's quite a strategic program. And my research revolves around geopolitics and regionally, but I have a specific interest around climate change, international politics, and the way that Pacific states, peoples, engage in this space. And so for the last few years, I provide strategic advice for SPRIP in how to coordinate Pacific states and coordinators to engage in this process. It's a privilege to be asked by IPO this year, to come into the Indigenous space. And it's been a time for me to see how we can get Indigenous peoples from across the Pacific and Australia to work strategically inside COP. And that first part was meeting and listening and hearing from the plethora of actors, or the plethora of people who participate, who have a vested interest in ensuring that not only just the voices, but the actions that will support Indigenous peoples, not only because of climate impacts, but the solutions that they have that can be amplified in these spaces. So what we've done since the Pacific Gathering is ensure that the issues of Indigenous people is anchored within the key asks of the Pacific. So we have this in terms of what we call the gender and social inclusion. So what we're fighting inside those rooms is ensuring that the language and inside the key text, so our main aim is in the global stocktake, the term Indigenous peoples is in that document. And not just to be in that document, but to also have teeth in terms of support, adequate sustainable support. That's something that the Pacific is pushing through our gender and social inclusion space. We're also pushing this within the stream around climate empowerment and gender. So while our negotiators are in the room, we're also texting our support group here, our Indigenous peoples here in COP. Is this the language that we want us to protect? And there's that cross-pollination in terms of how we're working with our Indigenous peoples and our groups, and that's because of the Pacific Gathering. You know, we're working, we're also trying to put them inside the delegations so that they are at the table as part of Pacific delegates, but under the mandate and the support of their countries. So we have that in terms of countries like Fiji, in terms of Niue, you know, we also are behind the scenes to try to support Indigenous peoples to make sure that their issues are on the table, but of course, working with state governments. We're also providing platforms in terms of media, in terms of news, in terms of side events, in terms of podcasts. We have an Oceanic Climate Cupcast that tries to elevate the voices of Pacific peoples, that it's genuine. But at the same time, that we have genuine outcomes that support Pacific peoples. Because if you ask, like last night, we had a podcast with Minister Ralph Regenvanu. What's your vision of COP31? He goes, our vision for COP31 is the voice of First Nations. Not just Australia, but all Pacific. Because for us, all Pacific people are First Nations. So it's not, it's always embedded in us. And so it's ensuring that those key asks are part of such a future campaign, but also that we have genuine outcomes that support the activity. So generally, what the Pacific Gathering has, in terms of what I got out of Pacific Gathering, is embedding Indigenous in a strategic, have a strategic role inside negotiations, but that's also through working with Pacific governments to ensure that some are at the table where they can, but especially the issues are inside the negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for sharing those words. And yeah, it's really, really great. I absolutely love to hear about the outcomes, the really, really strong outcomes, and the relationships that were born out of the Pacific Regional Gathering. In my view, that's what the LCIPP is all about. It's about creating those connections, that sharing of experience and knowledge, so that parties, so that states, negotiators can work side by side with Indigenous peoples in a very inclusive and participatory way for that meaningful engagement. So absolutely thrilled to hear that that was a key outcome for SPRIP, for Pacific negotiators such as yourself, and New Zealand looks forward to continuing those korero and helping to support you or in whatever way we can. So thank you for that. I now move on to our last panelist who has a presentation for us all. So Eriti, would you like to take the podium? Thank you.
First of all, in all gratitude to my brothers and sisters at the panel, they have said all that I would love to say. We have gone through all of it. However, I should make a remarks that our ancestors, used to have a very strong connection. I'm talking millennium years back. And there were no airplanes, there were no big boats, but they had canoe. But they have this connection not only by canoe, they did have a strong spiritual connection until today. When we see a Pacific person, it could be a miles away, 100 miles away, I will know he's from there, from the region. So in that regard, I shall conclude with all gratitude. I express my gratitude to the government of Australia for the making possible the Pacific Gathering. And I come from the most isolated island on Earth, where you cannot reach any benefit or COP or United Nations until this last decade. Before that, the island was so isolated under colonization, living technically as slave, obliged to assimilation. So today we have tried to reach international arena to talk about ourselves, to talk about our suffering, but beyond the suffering or the inconveniences that we had historically, we look forward to the future. In my capacity as Pacific Regional Representative, I stand here to advocate not only for climate change, but for decolonization, for human rights, for many other issues that is pending to be solved. And also, the unfortunate sea level rise in the Pacific have disrupted several islands, displacing families, their homes, their stories, their dreams, their belonging, all gone, swallowed by the climate harm. Those frontline victims continue terrified. Indigenous people across the Pacific region continue being severely impacted by climate crisis. As frontline victims permanently battling with the adverse impact of climate change. Tired of dealing with the pain and suffering caused by worsening cyclone storms and floods, losing everything, today, nowadays, we have to come to a level of reflection and realize that, therefore, they have earned the right to equality, the right to keep their seat at the negotiation table, to be part of making decisions in all the processes of negotiation, funding mechanism, and grievance procedure related to preventing and redressing loss and damage, and respecting their enshrined rights as stated across international law. Therefore, our safety, food security, and life are depending on our collective global capacity to make urgent action strategy to revert and prevent the climate persistence harm. For Rapa Nui to mitigate and prevent impact is urgent. Therefore, we recommend, 1, to empower collective determination in regard to replace fossil fuel across the Pacific to avoid the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. 2, to promote a region free of landfill, transforming them into eco-park for climate science research, an interaction learning center. 3, for the promotion of a region free of plastic. Propose to replace plastic and repurpose novel material. Plastic are greatly harming us directly. 4, to switch to renewable energy. The 3, excuse me one moment. Can you play the, oh. The 3 Solar X. Okay. This particular innovation, let me see. Oh. Oh. The green energy 3 Solar X by Amber. This particular innovation we discover as a powerful renewable energy possibility for Rapa Nui and for the Pacific. This innovation provides three powerful benefits in one set by concentrating the sun heat at the focus of one steel-made parabolic dish with a new development Stirling device supplying electricity, water, and hydrogen. There is none right now in the market an innovation of this particular, I don't know how to deal with this there. So, as you see, there is a parabolic made of stealing. That collects the sun and then transform into electricity. Okay. Into electricity. But besides, it has two other benefits: water and hydrogen. We could, in the future, actually replace fossil fuel by hydrogen. And that won't be contaminant or pollutant. So I go to number 5. This is a powerful instrument or tool for a sustainable development. Sustainable development is an essential element in human survival and very powerful instrument capable of generating sustainable economy and eradicating poverty. It is the most powerful because it guarantees stability and safe growing, sustainable economy as well as productive. And 3, solar eggs provide that benefit. That's why the Rapa Nui Parliament is trying to implement in Rapa Nui, not only because it's a necessity, but also is to become a pilot project that could be used across the Pacific. In biodiversity, the Pacific Ocean has been the landfill of nuclear waste, of microplastic, and millions of tons of waste. In that regard, Rapa Nui recommend or request that every island or great deer in the Pacific have their own vessel, not only to clean the ocean, but to protect their resources. The fish resources, it's been violated by unreported fleet of vessels from so many different countries, Russia, Japan, China. It's easy to see all this evidence in Rapa Nui. So it's necessary that the Pacific have and be provided of these emergency tools. And also allocate resources to comprehensively identify and monitor the state of biodiversity with special emphasis on protected areas and other biodiversity conservation measures. We also are concerned about having access of indigenous people to resources, economical resources, capacity build-up resources, serious consideration from international arena. In the Pacific today, they need the support of every nation to build up not only their capacity, they are being destroyed by the impact of climate change. All the goal of this project that the Parliament is promoting is to reduce our risk from the harmful effect of climate change. Rapa Nui proposed a sustainable economy and renewable energy model across the Pacific Island based on sustainable development, productive pilot, and learning among us. Finally, we highlight that the two main objectives of Rapa Nui Foundation are the promotion of sustainable, productive, and mitigation of climate change. Rapa Nui will be a pioneer in implementation of the program created and then share and apply this example and practices in the rest of the Pacific Island. Thank you very much. This equipment transform the waste 80 to 100 tons into construction material, material to pave roads, and dirt to nurture agriculture. It's integrally sustainable. Thank you. This is the island.
Thank you so much to our elder. Can we give another hand of applause for our panelists? Thank you so much, sister from Rapa Nui. Absolutely beautiful. And thank you for highlighting some of the solutions and innovations from Rapa Nui and just providing a bit of a flavor of some of the mitigation and adaptation solutions that we heard at the Pacific Regional Gathering. We heard about this presentation and many, many more from throughout the region. And they're really solutions that are holistic. They deliver sustainable development, co-benefits, and they really highlight the priorities for the Pacific, I think. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm a little conscious of time, but I do really want to open up the floor for some questions. If we had maybe 2 or 3 questions from the floor, we'd be happy to take them now, and then we'll have some closing remarks from the ambassador again before we go into the presentation of the documentary. Do we have any roving mics? I've got a mic somewhere. We've got one here. Any questions from the floor about the Pacific Regional Gathering, or any questions for the panelists? Or any reflections? I see that there's some of our sisters from Fiji and from Australia in the room. So please, if you have anything that you'd like to chip in with, then please, I invite you to take the floor now. Tale? Yeah. Oh, there we, Lavinia.
Vinaka, ladies and gentlemen, just some reflections from the Pacific Regional Gathering in Cairns this year in October. Again, my name is Lavinia Nevalu, and I am a district representative from a very small district in Fiji. And I was being appointed as the first woman to be a district representative out of 195 districts back home. So I went back home to the chief after the Canes meet, and I was telling my people, and when I was presenting to the chief, the Canes event was a blessing to my district because it had actually took me as a community lead, voicing and amplifying my community voice at a regional gathering. And this is what I believe. This is climate justice, taking me, including me and my communities in decision-making processes. I was blessed. I felt like I went back home and I was telling my children, at least I can now know that someone is hearing what we are going through, the struggles and the sacrifices that we are going through as grassroots communities. We are taking it now to the international platforms, Vinaka.
Thank you, sister. It was an absolute pleasure to have you there and to hear your stories. And it's amazing to hear that you were able to take those back and to see you here at COP28 as well. So thank you so much for being here. I believe we've got another sister from Fiji, Safara. Oh, or was it Tale?
All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Tale Silimbaravi, and I'm a mother and also is a project coordinator for the My Way Women's Club. That's based in Cavell Island. It's close to the DSR. So when I'm, just by attending the event at Port Douglas, the impact that it had on our local communities. They were like, how will you be able to go to Australia and speak on these events and the Indigenous people's, issues? And as a youth, I'm very blessed that, being part of that space, it has empowered them to become involved. While going back and then coming to COP, a mother messaged me just last night, and she was she works for the fisheries department, and she was telling me that her class 5-year-old daughter, she's been listening to my journey. She showed her my journey throughout, and she wants to become, environmental activist, a marine biologist, and that for me is a positive indicator of, being included in this space as a community advocate, as a community person. So yes, I was very grateful for the lessons and also this, being in that space, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. And yeah, just by listening to all the stories shared, it kind of refreshes me and pushes us as a youth to become, not to become more involved, but to empower the next generation. It's very, I'm blessed and grateful for the opportunity. Vinaka.
Vinaka. Les.
Yeah, hello, my name's Les Schultz. I'm from southeast Western Australia on the coast, Great Australian Bight, Nullarbor, in that area. I went to the Pacific Gathering up in Port Douglas, and I was grateful that the Indigenous Peoples Organisation of Australia was the main host that brought that together. It was good to see many nations across the Pacific come together and speak on different issues. We in Australia, we have our own issue. It's a no vote. Somehow we've got to pick that up to make it better, to be inclusive so that we're at the table. I'm speaking from Indigenous Australia. The no vote was a hard hit in the guts, but the Pacific Gathering brought us back to our feet again, and we're pushing on. We've been around for thousands of years, and we're going to continue this journey whether you want us at the table or not. And I'm just glad our ambassador's here today. He's doing a fantastic job at the forefront. making sure Indigenous voice is there. We definitely need more gatherings at this level, because sometimes your own Australian government won't support you and people won't support you. But we know as a regional gathering, we are supported, and at a global gathering, we are supported. And sometimes we've got to drag some of our little boys and girls along to the meetings and grow up and make decisions that are mature and that's progressive for all peoples. And yeah, so it's a privilege. I'm privileged to be here today, to be able to hold this microphone and speak. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to bring the voice of Indigenous Australians and the Pacific into this United Nations perspective. I think United Nations are slowly getting it. We're COP28. We Indigenous nations have always been here on this globe. Don't take too much longer, please. We want you guys to hurry up and bring us in. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Les. I see we've got 2 more hands. I'm very conscious that we only have 10 minutes left in our presentation, so perhaps we'll go to our sister down the back, Safira, and to this hand over here, and then we'll wrap up the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Bula all. Glad to be here. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to Port Douglas just because I was stranded up in the islands I was working in. But one thing I'm so happy about, I'd just like to thank the Australian government for hosting and to continue to host if probably New Zealand can join in. And thank you very much for this. One thing, Madam Erti, thank you very much for the solutions that you put up on your presentations, which I would like to take out to the communities that I visited, that I was distracted or I was stranded in and couldn't join my sisters and brothers from the Pacific in Port Douglas. But one thing I'm very happy about, if that can come into my communities back in the island, I would really appreciate it, because they have to take 3 months of no rain. They don't have any water, and the ladies have to go and search for water to get to wash their clothes and cook their food. That's something I would like to see if that can happen. And I'm so happy that I could be here to listening to you. If that could be possible, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We've got one more question up the front. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Daba Namuna. I'm the daughter of the Paramount Chief of the land of Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. And I'm grateful to be here because of Chief Sele in nominating me to participate in COP28. I did not attend the Indigenous Forum in Port Douglas, but I am grateful that such forums are being made available for especially us Indigenous peoples, especially when it comes to addressing decolonization that has happened because of being colonized by Australia in previous years before independence. But the colonization has left much of us in terms of losing our land and losing the rights to our land, and now in us trying to control what is happening throughout the world. So I'll just put it as a statement first, that when it comes to us Pacific Islanders, we are very much different from the rest of the world, where we are a blue continent. We are an ocean continent. We're not a land continent, as Europe and Africa and America, where you are more concentrated on your lands. Whereas we are going to be facing more of what you have done in terms of industrialization and moving with technology in the world. We will be the first to disappear. Our islands are disappearing, especially in Papua New Guinea. We have already lost 3 island communities, and they are now climate refugees, and we are losing our coastal areas. And not long, only if the mountains are left, where will the rest of us disappear to? And I believe not long, maybe even Kiribati will migrate to Australia because you are the largest continent in the South Pacific. And these are things that the world really needs to have a look at if we are going to disappear. Because you want to progress with development. But where do you want to develop to? So I would leave that to our good ambassador. My question is, now that you have started, we need a bigger platform for the Pacific. Europe has done its colonization. Also Asia. You can see that Africa now is moving to the next level. The last doorstep will be the Pacific. And the answer lies in the Pacific. And I'm talking to you as the daughter of a paramount chief. The last solution in terms of environment, climate, and the changes that we are facing through these effects, the answer lies in the Pacific Ocean. You dump your waste, you dump toxic, you overfish, but when it comes to us as a people, we are small, but we are content with the little that we have. And when the world realizes that, definitely they will come to the Pacific. And it is a thank you to the Australian government for such programs. Very, very much needed. And I thank you, Chief Sele, for the opportunity to be here and for me to be able to stand and raise one question. Are we spreading this news? Can we make it bigger for the rest of the Pacific to have this voice? Because MRIP at the UN, you can see it does not actually give us the teeth to show where we are as a Pacific nation. And when I say Pacific nation, it's because we are nations together as one underneath the Pacific. Not with Asia, as the Pacific. We need our own platform. And I thank you that a Pacific regional gathering such as that, held in Australia, needs to spread throughout the rest of the Pacific Islands. Thank you.
Thank you for such a powerful statement, and thank you for that challenge. I think with that, I don't have much else to say, but perhaps, Ambassador, you wanted to share some closing... Yes, absolutely. Please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for the challenge. It's exactly what you've said. I couldn't agree more with. As I said earlier, Pacific, we're so unique, we're so diverse, and we've got so much to offer the rest of the world. And apart from that, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. If you just have to look around the many images which are in here and next door. I was looking, when I was sitting in the room next door, I was looking at all the images and said that this is our home. So we've got to look after it, and it will look after us. We heard from all the speakers, and I know that we're going to go into the screening now of this, as they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So you'll see, we probably had 1,000 words up here, but you'll see a very condensed version of what the week looked like, but a beautiful version. And everything, and when you watch this screen, I had a sneak preview of the screening this morning, which I was privileged to see that for the first time. But when you watch the screening, I want you to keep the words which are spoken up here from each one of the panel members about these important issues, and also just from the floor here, just what we've heard from statements from the floor. But this screening, I think, really captures what it can look like when we get the balance right and the combination right of having our elders' voices, our young people's voices, and everyone in between that, having the dialogue, which includes lived experiences, it includes what research is showing us, what policy is saying, and also to capture what our aspirations are. The other side of this screening will also show that how we as a Pacific nations, that when we come into the room or we come together, how many things we have in common with each other, but also the experiences and the knowledges that we share across, how it empowers. And we just heard from Uncle Les today. This forum was on 2 days after the referendum, and it really strengthened many of the Indigenous peoples from Australia that attended that. I spoke to many, but we came away with stronger, and I know that our Indigenous brothers and sisters across the Pacific that joined us. We walked out of there stronger than when we walked into that room over that week's journey. So it shows the diversity that when we come together, the power that we have as a Pacific nations and what we can speak about. The other part, when you'll see this great the screening, is that also how we combined and we got the balance between the contemporary meeting environments of desks and chairs and PA systems, but also included our connection to on-country. And you'll see some of the things we did. We don't probably look as spectacular on-country, walking through and nearly tripping over things, but it's all there in the water, in the mangroves, in the rainforest. And how that interwoven all together, that we've been able to, that week was not only just us coming in and moving in and moving out, but combining both of our connection to country, what a contemporary environment can provide, and obviously our knowledges and our experiences, and also the presentations that took place over that week was a combination of our using modern technology, using traditional song, and embracing both of those as we spoke about these very important issues. And not only did Australia host it, I know we had a lot of thanks from people, not only did Australia host that, and the Australian government got behind hosting this gathering, but it was for the first time, or one of the first times, that not only did Australia host, but we had our First Nations people of Australia to lead that process. We also had from everything from our leading it to our facilitators to our speakers, and you'll see the many voices that you'll see and the people that are speaking, that it is our Indigenous peoples from Australia and also across the Pacific. That was our gathering, and it was done in a way which I believe we should do more of these gatherings into the future. So please enjoy the screening which is going to take place. I might ask if people kind of maybe sit down because the screen will be able to change. Thank you.
It's not a new thing for us. It's the re-establishment of those old partnerships and those old times that we worked together, talking about those old ways again, but in a new environment. And in this particular region, we're seeing a whole range of climate change crises. So it's bringing out a different conversation now, where it's not sharing cultural things. It's more sharing about how do we survive in this environment, how do we protect it, how do we ensure that we can pass on to our next generation and the generations yet to be born the kind of environment that we live in now.
I think young Indigenous peoples are very important to be involved in climate action, is because if you look at community-wise, people who are usually contributing and who are usually working with jobs in community and infrastructure are usually young people and strong people. And I think having them involved in this sector of fighting against climate change will also make a huge impact, because we have elders who are not really able to walk and to go into government house and also speak, and also in conferences to speak about these problems.
We should acknowledge that our Indigenous or traditional knowledge elders are researchers themselves, And that's the first part. We can't move to writing or increasing the number of researchers if we don't acknowledge that first. One of the things that needs to be done is for us who can walk both worlds to help bring some of our knowledge holders along.
Our elders, they're not going to be here for much longer, you know, and who else is going to take charge for them? And there's not really much to add to it. It's our future. We're the ones that's going to be cleaning up all of the mess.
If we're going to talk about the future, we should have people who are going to be living in the future involved in this type of work.
We need to stand up and help each other. From where I come from, we have 22 provinces, 800 cultural backgrounds, and 600 plus languages. So I have to be clear on what I will bring across to the people in my country.
There's a lot of stuff right now that is all the top-down approach, but we need, how about we start from the other side, a bottom-up approach, because some of the things that we have, we are losing out. We really need everyone on board, because this is not just a fight for our identity. It's about the identity of our children, of our next generation.
We have to ensure that we have First Nations people, Indigenous people, through that journey from where we are here. And as we go, no, we can't take everyone with us, but there is First Nations people right through that journey, right to the final stages. If it's writing that report to what's going to be the final recommendations or the how that report is constructed.
You've got traditional owners. This is what we say from the ground level, and as soon as we take it up, they don't listen to our recommendations. So the recommendations is actually pushed to the side, and they've got their own recommendations there that they think is best for us, that's not the case.
So it's a two-way, it goes up, and also that then as it comes back to these sort of forums about what we have done, what has been achieved, what probably hasn't because of difficulties, and then, we're walking that journey together right through, not just in the consultation. And, what I say, meetings like this are kind of the door that opens, but we need to continue to take Indigenous people right through and make sure that we have that dialogue happening right to the top.
I think we should also consider that our chants, our stories, our songs, these are other forms of recording or information that should be considered worthy of peer-reviewed journals and should also be considered as valuable source of information.
In these particular regions, particularly for Indigenous Australians, we know how to look after country. We've been doing it for 60,000 years. It's not new knowledge, it's old knowledge. It has to be brought in here to be mixed with the new knowledge, and how we marry that together is a challenge, because some of the issues and the challenges that we see are not of our own making. We didn't create a lot of this stuff. And we don't know how to tell the ones who are doing the damage, time to stop, time to change, time to re-examine, reinvest in some other ways of doing these things here, but let's do it as quick as we can. And most of our nations and peoples in this particular region aren't rich nations. And many of us have been exploited so much. And so the damage has been great.
We have been struggling in our own societies to farm our land, to provide water at home, and this is all gone when industries like mining and companies that come into our land and extract our resources, and it causes loss to lives and damages to the land. By looking at national level and the international level, women has to play vital roles. We have to be educated to be that woman of change.
Many people have raised things that seemingly in the session this week aren't about their challenges and pressures and difficulties that they're having, and in their whole comment or story, they're not talking about climate change. And it would be easy to say, this isn't about that issue or that issue, this is about climate change. But then when you actually sit back, you realise that for many people, and in particular First Nations and Indigenous communities, there are already so many challenges that they're dealing with that when you throw climate over the top, it really does exacerbate a range of existing challenges and inequities that they're facing. And so I guess just realising that climate sits across many issues, and you need to be aware of the full picture when you're seeking to engage and respond genuinely to community needs.
Just I'm 31, and the place where we used to play is it's no more. It's part of the beach. So that's something that, we need to do something. One of the houses at home, half of their home were underwater. So now they're going further inland. So not just that, I was working in one of the conservation NGO, and we went to one of the villages. Their burial site was underwater. It is just we need to do more. That's the whole point of it. It's still not enough.
In this unity, God commands blessings.
So we just do need the funds, the monies, to be able to put in place the kinds of mitigation and adaptation strategies that we need to put in. And that needs to be done very, very, very quickly. It needs to be done swiftly. And we got the knowledge, we know what to do. Give us the time, give us the money, and give us the resources, and we'll make sure we can stop this climate crisis in the Pacific region.
This is our prayer of hope, a prayer of blessings, and a prayer of peace. May God continue to shower His blessings to all of you.
Every single project, I believe, that is supposed to be made in a country shouldn't be government approved, but Indigenous peoples approved. Thank you.
What the heck? Where did that come from? Gee, oh, damn.
I don't know.
You good?
Yeah, we're good. Thanks.
Wow, I'm absolutely speechless. That was my first time seeing it. I got quite emotional actually reliving that experience, but can we maybe have another round of applause? Thank you so much for your participation today. Thank you to the Australian government and the Indigenous peoples from across the Pacific for your strong support of the regional gathering, and absolutely beautiful. I really hope that we can get a copy of this documentary for our colleagues back home, our rangatahi, our youth back home. I'm sure they'd be really, really happy to see themselves reflected in this. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. And if our panellists remaining could join us up the front for a photo, that would be great. Oh, you want to?